Greetings! We are entering the winter season, so I've got a little riddle for you young people out there. Or a story. Penguins and Arctic seals can't get along. Why not? They're polar opposites. Think about that one. I appreciate those of you who are participating in this ministry. Daniel and I, my older son Daniel and I had the opportunity to give seminars last Sabbath in Lexington, Kentucky. And Daniel has recorded that material. I think he actually did one of them, or maybe both, before he ever went up there. So this is not necessarily what he said there, but it's the material that he covered. He has two very good seminars available, and they're available on the Flare channel on YouTube. And I hope eventually to record my messages there and have them available on our own channel, Christian Commandment Keepers, and also on the YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about the good news through the centuries. The good news through the centuries. You know, there's a gap of 4 centuries between the closing of the Hebrew and Aramaic scriptures and then the beginning of the New Testament that was preserved in Greek. If an Orthodox Jew is reading the Old Testament, the order of the books is not as we have in the general translations that most people use, but it is available in a different arrangement of the books. And I know that those are becoming more common now. A lot of you may own a copy of the Bible with that order of the books. I want to go to Luke 24 and verse 44. Here Jesus is explaining his role in God's plan of salvation to these two men that he's with. And then in verse 44 of Luke 24, then he said to them, "These are the words which I spoke to you when I was still with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me." So he looks at the Bible in 3 parts. The Jews have preserved the Old Testament in 3 parts: Torah, the law, Nevi'im, the prophets, Ketuvim, the writings, or the hagiographer, the holy writings. And so you have the acronym Tanakh. So when Jews are speaking Hebrew, they often refer to the Old Testament as the Tanakh. And usually and generally speaking, the Tanakh begins with the book of Psalms, and it's a major portion of that whole 3rd section. So we can think in terms of the Bible in that way. And if an Orthodox Jew is reading the Bible, so he'll begin in Genesis, and then he'll finish with the writings, and the writings end with 2nd Chronicles, or actually Chronicles is looked upon as one long book in a way. So Chronicles kind of summarizes the history of the Old Testament, and then you go from there. Then, if you were a Christian, you would then go from there to the book of Matthew. So let's take a look at some historical overview of the Bible. We start with an innocent martyrdom. We start with the murder of Cain, who was a righteous person, murdered by a sinful person. And in Genesis 4:10, God confronts Cain. What did I say? I meant to say the murder of Abel. I don't know if I misstated that. Abel is the first righteous martyr. Cain murders Abel. And in Genesis 4:10, God says, and he's speaking to Cain, and he said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Very, eloquent, poetic language written in Genesis here. So we have that first martyrdom. Now, if you're reading through the Bible, as I said, in the Jewish order, the last book you'll come to is 2nd Chronicles. So let's go to 2nd Chronicles, and we'll see another martyrdom of an innocent person, a righteous person, by wicked people. And we find that in 2nd Chronicles 24. Now, we had a king who had been protected by the high priest Jehoiada and his wife, who was the aunt of this young man, this baby, this child. he would have been murdered because he was an heir to the throne, but he was protected. This king, as a child, was protected by the high priest and his wife. His name is Jehoash or Joash. You can read about him in 2 Kings 12, or you can read about him here in 2 Chronicles 24. And while the high priest was alive, eventually he put this person on the throne as a child, and the child grew up under the tutelage of this high priest, and of course eventually reached maturity. And he instituted a lot of very positive reforms, which you can read about here in 2 Chronicles 24. And then finally, we have, he wanted to repair the temple, so maybe I'll pick it up there. Let's go to let's just say that the temple was repaired. A lot of good things were happening. And then Jehoiada dies. He lived an extremely long lifespan, very unusual. Just recently, a famous actress in America died, Betty White, and she was almost 100 when she died. Excuse me. But this high priest lived to be 137. This is verse 15 of 2 Chronicles 24. But Jehoiada grew old and was full of days, and he died. He was 137 years old when he died. And they buried him in the city of David among the kings, because he had done good in Israel, both toward God and his house. So this high priest was very much honored for what he did. Now after the death of Jehoiada, the leaders of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. So evidently people came who were very hostile, very negative, and caused him to go in a very different direction. So now we have, he's making very bad decisions, self-destructive decisions. Therefore they left the house of the eternal God of their fathers and served wooden images and idols, and wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem because of their trespass. So now we have a decadence taking place after the death of this high priest who had protected this child, who now is king, now is a young man and is king. Yet he sent prophets to them to bring them back to the eternal, and they testified against them, but they would not listen. Then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada. So now we have a priest who's the son of this priest who has died, and he's inspired to bring to their attention once again what they're doing, the self-destructive behavior. So let's repeat that beginning. Excuse me. Then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest, who stood above the people and said to them, Thus says God, why do you trespass the commandments of the eternal, so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the eternal, he has also forsaken you. Very, very strong words. And you'll see later on that, unfortunately, they didn't listen, and so they did suffer the consequences. But you know what happens when you don't like the message? You go after the messenger. So that's what happened here. So they conspired against him, and at the command of the king, which is really shocking. The king had been protected by this man's father, and taught and prepared and raised up to take over the throne by this man's father. And yet he commanded that this man be executed, or murdered is a better word for it. So they conspired against him, and at the command of the king, they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the eternal. An incredible abomination there taking place. Then Joash, thus I'm in verse 22 now. Thus Joash the king did not remember the kindness which Jehoiada his father had done to him, but killed his son. So as he died, he said, The eternal look on it and repay. Which he did, as you keep reading. So it happened in the spring of the year that the army of Syria came up against him, and they came to Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the leaders of the people from among the people, and sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus. So they came down, raided, plundered, murdered, and brought back plunder up to Syria. And it was above and beyond a natural occurrence, because theoretically the Jews should have been able to defend themselves successfully, but in this case they failed. For the army of the Syrians came with a small company of men, but the Eternal delivered a very great army into their hand, because they had forsaken the eternal God of their fathers. So they executed judgment against Joash. And now we see that because of this failure, now Joash gets his comeuppance, you could say. He's assassinated. And when they had withdrawn from him, for they left him severely wounded, excuse me, his own servants conspired against him. So he had already been injured during this battle, but now his own servants conspired against him because of the blood of the sons of Jehoiada, the priest, and killed him on his bed. So he died. And they buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. So it's written here in the plural. Perhaps other relatives of Jehoiada were also killed at that time, or maybe to emphasize the magnitude of the act. But anyway, so he was murdered, so he died, and they buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. So he didn't even have the same status of the more respected kings. So in effect, he died ignominiously, and it names here the conspirators, and it summarizes some more of the history here. So this was as I said, as you're reading the Old Testament, this is the final, even though it's in 800 BC, but here you're reading a summary of events. So you go from Abel, the first martyr, to now this martyr, Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada. And in Matthew 23, Jesus is summarizing, the crimes of his own people, unfortunately, sad to say. He's talking about the fact that righteous people over the centuries have been martyred. People have not wanted to hear what they had to say, and it so provoked them that often, death was to that person was the way they responded. And so in Matthew 23, verse 35, he's telling them, I'm about to be martyred. He doesn't say that explicitly here, but that's what's happening. He's about to be martyred, and then a generation later, that city was going to come to destruction, and many of its people exiled. So in effect, he's saying things are coming to a head. Your self-destructive behavior is finally coming to a head. I'm here to give you this final warning, and then the next generation will see the climax. But we go to Matthew 23 and verse 35, and I want to go to the 34th verse as Christ is speaking to these spiritual leaders who unfortunately, did not live up to what they were supposed to be, to say the least. Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah. So, you see, because, as I said, if you're reading the Bible from Genesis through Chronicles in the Jewish order, you're going to come to the final martyrdom of Zechariah, the priest. And he calls him here Zechariah, the son of Berechiah. And that's not such a shocking thing, because there were many people in the Bible that had more than one name. So very likely Zechariah, so very likely Jehoiada also had that other name of Berechiah. So he calls, which is also indicative of the kind of person he was. Here it means blessed blessed be the eternal, Berechiah. So anyway, I'll stop interrupting myself and read the whole verse through. That on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. As I read earlier, and then he goes on to say, assuredly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. So as I said, reading through the Bible, this connects the book of Chronicles to the book of Matthew. Now, the last section of the Bible, that third section, the writings, is very important for establishing the background to the coming of Jesus Christ. The Jews are brought back from captivity. They reestablish themselves in their homeland. They reestablish the covenant of Sinai. the priesthood and the priests and Levites are back functioning. The temple is rebuilt. And you even have a descendant of David, Zerubbabel, initially ruling over them, though they no longer have the monarchy of David. But the family of David is still with them. Somebody pointed out something to me a long time ago, and that is that in the first century, when Jesus Christ came as the Messiah, of course he was rejected by the leadership, but when he came as the Messiah, at that time, genealogies were recorded, so people could have checked his background and seen that indeed he was a descendant of David on his mother's side and on his legal father's side, Joseph. Excuse me. If somebody comes now and claims to be a descendant of David, we don't have those records anymore. So that's just an interesting point. But anyway, I want to focus on this final third of the Bible and what was being accomplished there. Those writings were, first of all, writings about royalty, writings about David, Solomon. We have Psalms and Proverbs and the book of Job. Job was a ruler among the Edomites. So you have royal material there. And it ties in with Jesus Christ coming to ultimately receive the throne of David, to become a king. First he had to come as a sacrifice, then he will come as a king. So it's setting that background, but it's also focusing on establishing where God's religion is, where his will is being carried out, where his plan is being fulfilled. In other words, it focuses on on Judea, on Jerusalem, on the family of David, on the family of Aaron and Levi. It focuses on where his work is based. It focuses on Jerusalem as the headquarters, you could say, of God's work at that time, and Jerusalem is where Christ came, and Jerusalem is where he ultimately will return, and Jerusalem will ultimately be the capital of the world. And then finally you have in Revelation the New Jerusalem. So it was important at that time to establish that, because to the north of Judea were the Samaritans, and they had their own version of the Old Testament religion. And it was, in effect, a perversion. It was a distortion. It was a mixture of paganism with the Old Testament. And they were a mixture of Jews and Gentiles that had become established in the northern part of that area. They had their own religion, and so they were, in effect, a counterfeit. And so in order to, in effect, make a distinction between God's way of life and those in the north, we have a focus on, as I said, on David, on the priesthood, and on Jerusalem. And at that time, very likely, is when the Jews switched the style of script that they used to preserve the Bible from the old Hebrew script, the Paleo-Hebrew, that you will see Charlton Heston coming down from the mountain, with the Ten Commandments. They're written in the old style of Hebrew. But for the last 2,500 years, the Hebrew script has been the script that is also the script of Aramaic. And you can find those letters in many of your Bible translations if you look at Psalm 119, because that psalm is organized according to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and in some versions the various letters are there. Or you could look at any Hebrew sign today, or any Hebrew book, as I said, for roughly the last 2,500 years, and that's the alphabet that's been used. And I think one reason, and I believe I was taught by that one reason for that was to, in effect, separate the canon of the Old Testament from what the Samaritans were doing up north. They still had an alphabet similar to that ancient Hebrew alphabet, the Canaanite alphabet. And so to distinguish the Bible from whatever they were doing, the Jews went to the Aramaic script. And as I said, that's been the case for 25 centuries. Now, speaking of 25 centuries, let's go back that far. And we come to Ezra, when the Jews had come back to the land, and the Samaritans wanted to kind of mix with them. And this would have, in effect, watered down their religion. And it would have eventually destroyed it over time. And so and they did so with a hostile intent. The intent was to undermine. It wasn't that they were wanting to be brotherly and neighborly and cooperate, but there really was a hostile intent. That's what we read about in Ezra 4. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the descendants of the captivity were building the temple of the eternal God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel. See, these are enemies now. These are Samaritans from the north, and they have a hostility at this point. They came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do, and we have sacrificed to him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." I think that was around 680 BC. But Zerubbabel, and now this, of course, is much later than that. Here, the Jews have returned. This is the 450s BC. But Zerubbabel, and actually, this is earlier. This is in the 500s BC. It's in the book of Ezra, but it's the time of Joshua and Zerubbabel. It's in the 530s BC. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses of Israel said to them, "You may do nothing with us to build a house for our God, but we alone will build to the eternal God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us." I'll say more about Cyrus after a while. Then the people of the land tried to discourage the people of Israel. They troubled them in building. And so they actually began to use the legal authority to try to suppress what they were doing. And it disrupted the building of the temple for quite some time. In verse 5, "And hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, until the reign of Darius, king of Persia." So they disrupted. They tried to make trouble for them. Go to the authorities and prosecute them, which was a form of persecution. It was malicious prosecution. So excuse me. So we find the Samaritans were a problem. Now, if you go to Luke 9, the Samaritans had their temple on Mount Gerizim in the north, and that was where they went to worship. So their idea was the center of worship is not Jerusalem. It's Mount Gerizim in the north, around the city of Shechem, the modern city of Nablus. And so they had their own holy place, up on Mount Gerizim, and they rejected the temple in Jerusalem. Well, if you go to Luke 9, you'll find that Jesus is going to Jerusalem, and he's with his apostles. And you come in verse 9 as he's heading to Jerusalem. I want to go to Luke 9, Luke chapter 9, verse 53. I'll go to verse 51. Okay. "Now it came to pass, when the time had come for him to be received up, that he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem." And this is, when he's about to give that message that I read some of in Matthew 23. He's on his way to do that. Okay. And sent messengers before his face. And as they went, they entered a village of the Samaritans to prepare for him. But they did not receive him, because his face was set for the journey to Jerusalem. See, they were thinking, "We don't want to help you out. You're going to the wrong place. The holy place is Mount Gerizim. We're not going to help you out if you're going to Jerusalem." So the hostility was still there. The Jews and the Samaritans had a hostile relationship. You remember that when Jesus talked to that Samaritan woman, she was shocked that he even wanted to talk to her. There was this hostility between those groups. Now there were times, when the Samaritans, were more sympathetic, but there were also times of hostility, and here this is evidently one of those times. Verse 54. "But when his disciples James and John saw this, they said, 'Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, just as Elijah did?'" Well, that was their personality, and he had to keep them under control. That's not the way to handle that, obviously. But he turned and rebuked them and said, "You do not know what manner of spirit you are of. For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them." And they went to another village. But this shows the tension that even at that time between the Jews and the Samaritans. And Jesus confronts the Samaritan woman in Luke 4, and rather in John 4. And actually, many Samaritans became converted and part of the early church. So there's a positive side to the Samaritans. Of course, you've heard of the story of the Good Samaritan. One reason why that story was such a shocking parable is because, among the religious Jews, they would think, "Who ever heard of a Good Samaritan?" And yet that's now become a phrase all of us know, the Good Samaritan. But he was making a strong point when he brought that out. The priest passed by the man, the Levite passed by the man, the Samaritan helped the man. See, it was a very powerful point that he was making. Now, in John 4, in verse 22, And as I said, many Samaritans became part of the early church. But in John 4, verse 22, he says to the Samaritan woman, well, here's what she says in verse 20. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where you ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on the mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. So, ultimately, there's a time coming when there's a new heaven and new earth, ultimately. But anyway, you worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, okay? He's telling a Samaritan woman, God's religion is with us. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. So this is how he confronts that Samaritan woman. And, okay, I see that I'm going to have to condense what I'm covering here. So the point of bringing out, I think I've shown you now the importance of that third section of the Bible, pointing us to Jerusalem, as I said, to the family of David, to the priesthood. John the Baptist was a Kohen. He was a descendant of Aaron. He led the way for Jesus Christ, who was a descendant of David, and is ultimately to become king. Well, I want to now go to Chronicles, and here you see when you come, as I said, to the end of the Old Testament, which is actually Second Chronicles in the Jewish order. Of course, it's a summary of the whole period, and so it has a lot of genealogical material. And as I said, part of it is to establish, where God is working. The Jews for the first century were the church at that time. And I go to First Chronicles, the first chapter, or I'm gonna try. All right, First Chronicles 1, and how does it begin? Adam, Seth, Enosh, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared. It starts with the genealogy of humankind, starting with Adam. But then you're going to focus, of course, on the Israelites, on the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you're going to focus on Judah, and particularly on David, because that's where the Messiah is coming from. And so you go to 1 Chronicles 3. Now these were the sons of David, who were born to him in Hebron, and it goes on and talks about them. So you see that as you read Chronicles, you have a genealogy of the human race, focusing finally on Israel, focusing also particularly on the Levites and the house and the tribe of Judah and the family of David. And now, what do you have when you go to Matthew? How does Matthew begin? The same way. So if you're reading along in the Bible, you read in Chronicles, the genealogy's there, and then as you go to Matthew, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So you're continuing right on with the genealogy, and you're establishing, in effect, his creds. You're establishing Christ's background. You keep reading, and there's a very strong emphasis on the fact that even from his legal point of view, from the point of view of Joseph, he's a descendant of David. And of course, Mary, his actual mother, is a descendant of David as well. And you can see her genealogy in Luke. Okay, now when you come to the end of the Old Testament, you have Cyrus. And Cyrus is in many ways a type of Christ. He conquers the Babylonian Empire, the Chaldean Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. He conquers it. And then he restores the Jews back to their land. And Cyrus' name in the ancient Elamite language could mean or could relate to being a shepherd or a pastor. And Isaiah plays on that in a prophecy. And this, in effect, was perhaps a self-fulfilling prophecy, because what the historian Josephus says, the Jewish historian Josephus, who wrote at the end of the first century, he says that Isaiah's prophecy was shown to Cyrus, and he was, I imagine, so shocked by it that he went ahead and did what it said. So it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But and he's called in Isaiah 45 the Anointed One of God. So he's a type of Christ. Mashiach, or anointed, or Christos in the Greek, anointed. You see in Isaiah 45:1, thus says the Eternal to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him, and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut. And I want to go to the end of the 44th chapter and verse 28, what God says of Cyrus. And as I said, it's a play on the meaning of his name. And remember, Jesus Christ is the ultimate shepherd. You read John 10, for example. Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid. And so if what Josephus says, Cyrus actually saw this, and so that would, of course, compel him to go ahead and do it. But anyway, that was the policy, evidently, of the Medo-Persian Empire, to restore exiled nations back to their land so that they would be more content, more satisfied, more stable. They still had to pay tribute, of course, to the Assyrians. I mean, to the Medo-Persians, but they were at least could be in their own areas and have autonomy to a degree. But they had local autonomy, but they had to send tribute to the Medo-Persian Empire. So I want to go now to the end of 2 Chronicles. As I said again, if you're reading the Old Testament in the Jewish order of the books, and now I come to 2 Chronicles. And of course, Cyrus plays a very important role in the restoration of the Jews at that time, which prepared the way for the coming of Christ. Now, in modern times, Harry Truman in 1948, who recognized Israel just a few minutes after the Jews declared an independent state. The United States was the first country to, just like minutes later, to recognize them. And Harry Truman compared himself to Cyrus. And in recent times, the Israelis have compared Donald Trump to Cyrus for what he did for them. But I want to go back to the Cyrus in the Bible. And in verse 22, as I said, Cyrus is a type of Christ. But this statement of Cyrus prepares the way for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's what I'm talking about today, the good news through the centuries. You see, there's a transition. As the Old Testament ends, it leads the way towards the New Testament. It all ties in together. The Hebrew and Aramaic scriptures tie in very directly to the Greek scriptures. They all tie in. It's really one theme, one story. That I finally came to understand fully when I was, many years ago, and it caused me to leave the yeshiva where I was and wind up being baptized into God's church. But anyway, in 2 Chronicles 36 and verse 22, where I am now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Eternal by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. And I don't have time to get into that today, but if you look at Jeremiah 25, he predicted there'd be a 70-year period of exile. So you go from 609 to 539, 70 years when the Babylonian Empire was in charge, and then the Medo-Persians replaced them. And so and Daniel was alive at the time the prophecy was going to be fulfilled, and so that caused him to really study into it. You can read about that in the book of Daniel. So I haven't lost you. Let's go to 2 Chronicles 36 and verse 22. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Eternal by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Eternal stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia. There is a spirit in human beings. It's not the human being, but it is a part. It gives us a power to be human. That's a topic for another day. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Eternal by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Eternal stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it in writing, saying, Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the eternal God of heaven has given me. And he has commanded me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So you see how he's a type of Christ. There's a partial restoration under Cyrus. It's not the full restoration. That only comes, when Jesus Christ returns. This is a type. It's a partial restoration. But I'm going to read the end of the Old Testament, because this is what Jews would be reading as they finish the Old Testament, and then I'm going to go directly to the beginning of the New Testament, and you'll see how they tie in. So I begin to read now. This is 2 Chronicles 36:23. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the eternal God of heaven has given me. And he has commanded me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is among you of all his people? May the eternal his God be with him, and let him go up. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. See how that all ties in? 4 centuries have gone by between this material and this material, but it all ties in. So we see that the good news through the centuries, that there is one theme through the Bible, God's plan of salvation, and it's in the Old Testament in a more of an implied form, and in a more clear, explicit form in the New Testament. So I hope this has been helpful in getting a perspective on how the Bible is put together. I want to finish by going to the end of the story, to the book of Revelation, and to the 19th chapter. And I want to go to verse 16. Here we see the return of Jesus Christ. He came first as a sacrifice. Now he comes as to rule the world and bring it peace. And so we come to Revelation 19 and verse 16, speaking about Jesus Christ as the returning King. And he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So this is how things come together at the conclusion. So I hope that this little talk today has helped us understand the good news continuing through the centuries. All the best to you and yours.